Okay. And welcome everyone. We only have one microphone that's working right now. So
I'm going to use my teacher voice. Everybody hear me? Okay. All right.
And my name is Nancy Toll. This is
Amy Thurston.
And we taught together at the middle school for years. And after retirement, had kind of found our way to the history room over here at the library. And so having fun looking up all sorts of information on Hudson's history. Yeah, that we'd like to share some today. Today's presentation is on some notable people in Hudson's history. And our definition of notable is worthy of attention. And there are so many people that could be in this presentation. It was really hard to narrow it down. So there might be a part 2 coming or a part 3 coming because of all the people that have formed Hudson to what it is today. So we hope you find some of this interesting. We'd love to have your input, so please add stories or comments as we go. We'd love to hear. So we're going to start with Amy then.
Yeah, this is really informal, and if you cannot hear me, let me know. Well, the first person that comes to mind whenever you think of the history of Hudson is Willis Miller. Willis Miller came to Hudson with his family at the age of like 3 or 4. And his family first rented a home at 1416 3rd Street. And it cost them $25 a month to rent that house. It's pretty incredible when you think about huge 14-room house. And in the fall of 1923, he started kindergarten in the high school that was raised in 1924. It stood at the corner of 4th and Oak Streets. Later, he attended what was then new 4th Street Elementary School. And then, of course, he graduated from Hudson High School. He was very active in debate and choir and orchestra. He then went to St. Olaf College, where he was able to sing in the St. Olaf choir. He earned a bachelor's degree there from St. Olaf. And then the next slide. This shows different people involved with the Hudson Star-Observer. John Clare, Eugene Pearson, Floyd Olson, Mrs. Albert Hanson. Walker Isaacson is probably someone you're quite familiar with. The publisher at that time, Yvette Ward. Katherine Johnson, who later wrote, they compiled a book of her column. And then Willis Miller, who was an editor at this time, and Bob McGrew. He began working for the Star-Observer at a wage of $11 a week. In 1940, his jobs included running the front desk, collecting news, selling ads, operating the mailing machine, sweeping floors, bookkeeping, along with other news responsibilities. In 1952, he became editor under Yvette Ward, who owned the paper. Yvette was the wife of Charlie Ward with Brown and Bigelow. The next 6 years were marked by excitement, celebrities, and plenty of Twin Cities exposure when the Wards were involved with the paper. In 1958, Yvette Ward offered to sell the Hudson newspaper, so Miller assembled a corporation and bought it for $100,000. Then he took on the role of publisher and continued until 1984. 68 years of working with the paper. Here we have another photo of him. He also helped found the St. Croix County Historical Society. He served as the first secretary and later the president. Next slide. He was inducted into the Hudson High School Wall of Fame. He's one of the distinguished alumni. And we have almost all of his books that he has written, copies of all the columns and everything in our history room.
So,
Oh, we should stop. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add about Willis Miller? Any stories?
We were just fortunate to have him to record our history.
Yes.
He was excellent at that. We loved it.
He was so interested in it, wasn't
Oh.
he?
I
Yeah.
was just going to add that his books are so well written. I've taken them out to elderly people who grew up in Hudson, and they just light up and say, "Oh yeah, I remember that person." And I mean, I'm so thankful that he was a part of this community and could put all of that information together for us.
Yes.
Well, probably just a few years before he passed on, I used to be a volunteer when they had Meals and Wheels at the hospital. And I was delivering, and I saw his name in one of the next apartments. I just knocked on the door and talked to him, and like I say, it was probably 2007, and just a sharp, friendly individual.
Very outgoing.
Yeah.
Somebody
And when
else?
he passed, he left over $1 million to UW River Falls. So, from starting out for 40, 50 cents an hour,
Yes.
was
And he loved to travel to other countries, and we have some of the books in the history room that were accounts of his travels too. Yeah, we're very fortunate. Is there?
I'll just say I used to work for him at the Star Observer back years ago. I worked in the print shop. He is just a very down-to-earth person, just very knowledgeable. Also had a big sense of humor. Used to join him with a group of other guys for breakfast on Saturday mornings at Dibbles. Just some of the stories more, but he also at the newspaper also kept a series of note cards, 3x5 cards, where he kept track of just
The people?
If you had your name, if you had your name in the newspaper, the reference to that article was added to that card.
And we have that in the history room. It's the biographical index that he put together, and it is amazing how he ever did this. This is before computer programs and things to help you all on note cards. Yeah, very cool.
Do you have family?
Pardon me?
Do you have family?
Never married, no children. I know Mrs. McGrew, if that name is familiar. She said that he would often have Christmas with them. He had certain people that invited him to Thanksgiving, and so he was never really alone. Yeah.
Well, we have an interesting story about him. He vacationed in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And he contacted me one day and said, "I met a relative of yours." I said, "In Mexico?" And he said, "Yes." He was in the lobby of the hotel or whatever it was where he was staying
Uh-huh.
and struck up a conversation with a man there. It turned out that he was a descendant of Peter Boucher. And I said,
What are the odds?
"Really?" He said, "Yes." And it was Walter Burke, who was a descendant. So later, Lonnie and I went to Puerto Vallarta and we met him.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
and Peter Boucher was one of the founders of Hudson.
A descendant of the Bouchers, but we found Walter.
Oh, that's so
Through
neat.
Willis and his vacationing.
Willis served on the selection committee for the Wall of Fame at the high school. I was
Okay.
fortunate enough over 10, 12 years to be on that board with him. And I would stay afterwards and listen to his stories. But if you bring somebody up, he'd say, "Oh yeah, that's blah, blah, blah's son or daughter." And they lived on 4th Street, and he was amazing at all the information that he had about the local
Yeah.
area.
Really was. Really was.
He was very proud of the fact that he lived 5 different places or something like that over his lifetime in Hudson. I think the last place might have been an apartment building. Is that where you?
That's the brick
Son.
apartments. Right over
Pardon
there.
me?
It's the brick apartments that are
Yeah.
Okay.
right across from the old post office.
Very close to
Yeah.
where the paper was.
In the
Yeah.
library.
Yeah.
So the paper was on Walnut Street
Yes.
originally, and then they moved up to
Locust.
across from the post office and library in the last years.
Well, we'll go back a few years then to another family or another person who was almost as notable as was. Most everyone knows where the Phipps house is, but do you know who the Phipps were? Okay. William Henry Phipps, he was one of the most influential and respected men in Hudson for half a century before his death in 1924. They assumed near legendary status in this community because of the philanthropic actions of William Phipps and his son, Stephen Carpenter Phipps. Phipps was born in Leamington, England in 1846 and came with his parents in 1855 to his first job for the state of Wisconsin Treasurer's Office in Madison. In 1875, he was put in charge of land grants and soon appointed land commissioner of the North Wisconsin Railroad Company, and that is how he ended up in Wisconsin, Hudson, Wisconsin. It was in 1904 that Phipps left the North Pacific Railroad and engaged in business for himself, dealing in land and manufacture and sale of lumber. His association with the First National Bank of Hudson spanned more than 3 decades. He had been a director of the bank since 1890, and then in 1907 he was elected president of the bank, holding that position for many years. Do you recognize this location downtown where Dragon Pearl is today? The old bank building? His wife, whom he married in Madison in 1873, was Frances Van Bergen, and though they had 5 children, sadly only one survived to adulthood, Stephen, who was born in 1878. Phipps was not a man to shy away from politics. Among other things, he was supervisor for Hudson on the county board. He served 3 terms as mayor of Hudson. He was elected to the Wisconsin State Senate in 1890 to fill Horace Mann's spot, and then he was reelected in 1892. He was devoted to the Presbyterian Church in Hudson and was a member for more than 30 years. He held various offices and donated the money to build the Sunday School addition in 1910, and he also gave Bibles to all the members of the church's confirmation classes. Besides all that, Phipps found time to serve on the Hudson Park Board and the Hudson Public Library Board. In fact, it was Phipps who went to New York in 1902 to personally contact agents of steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, who donated $10,000 to establish the first Hudson Public Library. And the Phipps home at 1005 3rd Street, built in 1884 to 85 in the elegant Queen Anne style, was without question one of the showplaces in Hudson and continues to be one of the finest examples of that style of architect to be found in the St. Croix Valley. The house is on the National Historic Register, and after his death in 1935, the house was sold and had a succession of brief owners from 51 to 66. It was converted into a nursing home by Arthur Medley under the name of the Hudson Rest Home. And then it was a rooming house. And in recent years, it's been a private home converted to a bed and breakfast. And today, if you've ever driven by there today, it's undergoing an extensive facelift and is a private residence. And Mr. Phipps died at his home on Saturday, July 12, 1924, surrounded by his family. And Stephen Carpenter Phipps, his son, he's the one that actually formed the William Phipps Foundation in January of 1946. He carried on his father's philanthropy. The foundation, named for his father, provided $1.7 million of the $2.2 million needed to build the Phipps Center for the Arts. He was born in Hudson in 1878 and lived here until 1945 when he moved to Seattle. He was a 1896 graduate of Hudson High School, and he died in 1977. And both William and Stephen and her 4 siblings are buried in Mill River Cemetery. And they were a little before people's time, but I'm sure the Phipps name is going to continue on in Hudson between the house and the Phipps Center for the Arts.
Well, Tony Zappa, who sadly died just this past year in 24, was notable for many, many different things. He was born in North Hudson, and as he said, quote, "I wasn't born in Hudson in a hospital. I was born right in the house at 722 Monroe Street North." His parents, Antonio and Mary Maria Zappa, arrived in North Hudson from Cumberland. A lot of the Italians came from the Cumberland area. Next slide. Here we have a picture of his parents. And then when he was in high school, he loved to be on the boxing team, which is something you don't see boxing teams at high schools much anymore. He graduated from high school in 1944. And in 1944, he then registered and served in the Navy during World War II. Here we have a picture of Tony with his brother Eugene, or Jewel, and then the son. He formed Zappa Brothers Excavating in 1946. 3 brothers actually formed that. And when the business started, they used to use hand spades to dig. And by 2006, they had nearly 50 pieces of equipment. The 3 brothers worked together for 25 years and then kind of went their own ways. One went back into working for the highway department. Over the years, the company has been involved with several local projects, including the excavation of Erickson's Freedom gas station on 2nd Street. Remember where that was? The Lakefront Park bandshell, soccer fields, White Camp Park, and they did earthwork on a number of school projects. Zappa Brothers Excavating is still family owned today. Tony's son, Gary, is now in charge of that company. Next slide. And then here's a picture of Tony's wife, Jane. Jane Gilbertson was her maiden name. They were married for 69 years and they had 4 children. One of the biggest things with him involves his involvement in various community-related things, including the Pepper Fest. And here he is in 1977 with the Queen Jill Johnson. And when he died, she wrote a really nice summation of her experience with Tony and what an upbeat and wonderful man he really was. Here we have the Royal Roundup in 1996. Some of the kings, past kings, or godfathers as they used to be called. The reunion was held at John Cody's house. Dan O'Connell is here in this. John Cody, Mike Solberg, Jeff DeBruzzi, and then Tony's in the back, second from the left. Gilbert, Lloyd Gilbert, or L. Gilbert, Dewey Swanson, Tom DeBruzzi, and Gary Zappa. And that's pretty much Tony. Does anybody want to say anything about Tony? Knew him?
You mentioned something to me about work on the football field, or that they did the. Yeah, okay. The Zappa brothers had done work on the football field for free.
I just know I lived not far from where he and his wife lived, and Sue Brathel, she said that when she moved to North Hudson, he came over with this huge pot of spaghetti. That was his way of greeting new people back in the time. Yeah. Yes. On the side of his road, he had his little garden with the tomatoes and the peppers that he would grow. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Then we're going to go way back here and talk about the Williams family. Tom Tom Williams came to Hudson in 1860. And he married Eleanor Margaret. They had 2 children, and the 2 children are the ones that are really kind of interesting too, Elsie Williams and Boyd Williams. Here in this picture, you can see where their father, Thomas, had the hardware store. This stood on the corner on 2nd Street, kind of where the abandoned Associated Bank is. This was next to it on the corner. The last business in there was T.O. Plastics. It was completed in 1867. It was one of the first buildings really built after the Great Fire of 1866. And it was considered to be Hudson's first fireproof structure. This was on the National Register of Historic Places, but sadly it was razed in 1988. The daughter, Elsie Williams, was kind of a character, an interesting character, flamboyant, perhaps a little bit ahead of her time in some areas. Born in Hudson, she was an elementary teacher for a bit, but her big thing was that she became an attorney. And that was not that common for women back in those days. In 1906, she was admitted to the Minnesota bar, and her law practice was in St. Paul. Elsie was the first female attorney to present a case to the Minnesota Supreme Court. And she was just kind of an interesting person. She didn't care for cats. She loved birds, and she did write an elaborate article on a particular type of bird that she observed on her property. In 1946, she was disbarred. From what I read in the case of disbarment of Elsie Williams, the disbarment centered around her not reporting some income as taxable and questionable charges to another estate. It is said that the disbarment caused her to become bitter, and she rarely left her home. People would see her walking across the toll bridge, sometimes with a horse, sometimes with her dog. Usually were very dark black like colors. But I think she would have been an interesting person to meet. When she died in 1958, she wished to leave the house to provide 5 to 8 women who were genteel and refined spinsters or widows with a place to live. And the board was composed of people who were against alcohol, and this sort of thing. But she had so many conditions in her will for this house and its upkeep that they really could not follow it. An example, it was a 26-page document she left. She banned any inks or medicines lest they ruin costly rugs, any nails driven into woodwork or walls, and of course she banned cats. So they couldn't follow it. So what happened was the St. Paul Episcopal Church were able to receive like $65,000. The Historical Society has an outfit of her clothing that they've displayed in the past, but the rest of the items were put up for auction. So here's the home at 212 Walnut Street. That was where the fire department built for a while and is now a parking lot. And it was really quite a neat Victorian type home. And then we'll go on quickly to the brother, Dr. Boyd Williams. Born in Hudson, went to high school here in Hudson, and then went to the Cincinnati College of Physicians and Surgeons and earned his medical degree in 1901. He was very involved with external cancers, and when he came back to this area, he opened the Williams Sanatorium for Cancer in Minneapolis. And then in 1932, this home might look familiar to people, right? On 3rd Street, 101 3rd Street. He opened this sanatorium. He believed that the doctor needed to live with the patients, that they would do the most good. He would get to know them much better. So he had some of the cancer patients were staying with him. He had an elaborate library on books related to cancer. And in 2012, the Mayo Clinic in Rochester displayed some of his 161 books on that topic in an exhibit. So again, like his sister, he was kind of ahead of his time. He also had peacocks on the property, and there are many people who can remember the screaming of the peacocks. He had other things there too, other animals. When he died in 1948, he left a trust dedicated to educational and charitable purposes in the city of Hudson. Money from his trust provided funding for the Williams Park at the corner of Laurel and 11th, the first Hudson Hospital, and during his lifetime, he donated money for the Hudson Arch. Anybody have anything? Probably wouldn't have known him that well, except you remember the screaming of the peacocks?
Well,
Or hearing about it?
We didn't live there, but we used to drive up 3rd Street Hill so we could see them.
Okay. Cool.
Well, Willis used to say that there was surgeries that took place in there. Cancer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, when that house was cleared before it became a residence again, they found specimens,
Yeah, in jars.
which they buried across the road. Yeah.
And that the peacocks were there to cover up the screaming during its surgery.
Well, I had an uncle that at that time was an Iceman. And he would deliver ice to that house, the hospital. And he said it was terrible, the screaming that he heard. People suffering.
Yes. Yeah.
You can imagine.
It wasn't just the peacocks,
early
no.
Cancer, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There was something, and there was some rumor that he himself was kind of addicted to something. In things that I've read about pain. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of controversy about his treatment.
Yeah.
So what was his treatment?
I don't know.
Usually dealt with skin growth and things that were external cancers. Not so much internal, breast cancer, other things that were. No, he tried to treat them for the time period. A lot of people say a lot of what he did actually was not far from what they do now. And, you know, just didn't have like we have today, different things, so.
Well, some of you might have known Herman Gustav Erickson, who was born in Isanti, Minnesota, to Swedish immigrants, Edward and Olivia Ostrom Erickson, in 1895. He graduated from Cambridge High School in Minnesota, where he was captain of the football team, and during World War II, he served in the Army. And in 1921, he married Hazel Christine Sandstrom. In 1923, the couple moved to Dallas, Wisconsin, where they opened a general merchandise and grocery store. And between then and 1935, they expanded and opened stores in Barron, Clayton, Boyceville, and Baldwin. And then finally, in 1939, Erickson's purchased the Burkno store. There's a picture of it up here in the corner, which was a leading dry goods and grocery business at 509 2nd Street in Hudson. And over the years, Erickson's expanded to include a chain of 16 supermarkets in Minnesota and Wisconsin. You can see that they went from there under construction to form the Erickson store, which is in the middle, and that's the building today in the bottom right corner. You'll see on 2nd Street. In 1939, Erickson and his 6 brothers founded Northwestern Refining Company in St. Paul Park, Minnesota. It was the first oil refining company in the upper Midwest. He served on the board of directors of the company until its merger with Ashland Oil in 1970. And he headed Erickson Oil Products in Hudson and developed the company into a large network of gas service stations, which were in 42 cities throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, and South Dakota by 1985. Probably remember Erickson's, but to be in downtown. While in Hudson, Erickson's contributed greatly to city projects. In 1966, he was appointed chairman of the Hudson Housing Authority by Mayor Krager, and which a position he held until his retirement in 1978. This picture shows him cutting the ribbon for the opening of the Christian Community Home in 1981, which was dedicated in memory of his late wife, Hazel. He was also a member of the Bethel Lutheran Church, American Legion, St. Croix Lodge 56, Royal Arch Masons Chapter 44, Order of Eastern Star, St. Croix Valley Yacht Club, and a jester for the Osman Shrine Temple in St. Paul. He was on the board of directors for Willow River Cemetery, and he married his second wife, Lenore Swinnerstrom Kelly, in 1978. The Ericksons' 3 boys became actively involved in the family business, which eventually divided in 1981 to include the retail gasoline business. Erickson Oil Products, under the name of Freedom Value Centers and run by Claire Erickson, it's in the middle there, and later with his son David. The retail or grocery business remained under the direction of Herman, along with sons Dean and Eugene. And if you know where you're at today, Erickson's Diversified built this building at 700 First Street in Hudson in 1995 to 96. It currently houses the library. Nash Fitch purchased the building from Erickson's in 1999, and then soon after it was owned by Nuclear Management Company. The city purchased the building in 2009 for the police department and the library. Erickson Oil Products was sold in 2015 to Cross America Partners. Anybody have any remembrances of Erickson's? Yes.
They were a very charming couple. And Herman was the sponsor for many, many Swedish people that came to this country. He sponsored them. And this is when they lived in northern Minnesota before they came here. But I have a fun story. A relative was a friend of Hazel's. And they would go to her house. I remember her telling, she had a room that was painted purple, and the accent colors were lime green. They said it was just gorgeous and a little out of the box for that time. I would have loved to see that.
So wait, what was the library building? Was it a store? It was like his headquarters?
It was built for their headquarters, yeah, Erickson Industries, Erickson Diversified in 1995. They built it.
We think the history room was one of the main offices because it has the overlook of the very, very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, we were told this one, and then around the corner from the children's room was another office there.
And this was built very environmentally. We had a
lot of input.
to go through a lot to build this building as it was.
Mm-hmm.
He was ahead of his time. It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Well, Helen Hughes. How many people knew Miss Hughes? Either had her as a teacher or very, very popular woman. Probably if on the Historic Hudson page, Facebook page, if I post anything about Helen Hughes, it just blows up. People really liked her. She was born in Hudson. She went to Carleton College and the University of Minnesota. She taught Latin, math, and later computer science. She retired in 1977, but she just continued on tutoring students until like 1991. You'll still see her picture in some of those yearbooks. but I doubt that she was even paid. She really loved what she did. Lots of past students have commented on her. Dorothy Jensen remembers her quite fondly, kind of took her under her wing and would take her with her to the University of Minnesota on Saturdays. And Dorothy would work on math, which she was really good at, and they pretty much did that. Dorothy had said that she was often a champion of the underdog. The next slide, we have a picture of Helen Hughes there in the front right with her telescope club. She took the year off in 1967 to do some astronomical research, and she was involved in the discovery of a star. And then this is her home, which a lot of you are probably aware of. It's at 904 6th Street. Often called the David Fulton or Fulton Hughes home. And it was built in 1885, and she pretty much lived there her whole life. And right now, it was called the Real Magic House, and the last I saw it was for sale again. I don't know if it still is. Yeah. They were offering to sell it as it is, like the Real Magic House.
I've walked past there a number of times and I haven't seen any indication it's for sale, but I think a few
Okay.
years ago there was kind of a major rehabilitation, painting of the outside, so it's in very good condition.
And they had to put in a couple furnaces and all of that because when she lived there, I know I went to the estate sale there, all of the wiring and everything ran along the top. It was a beautiful home. Yeah.
She had a brother they called Duke,
Yes.
and he was a friend of my uncle's at that time. And he had taken a horse up stairs in the house. Well, I guess it wasn't so bad going up, but you can't get a horse to go down, I understand.
Oh, wonderful.
I don't know what the outcome was.
Is the horse still there? Anything else with Helen Hughes?
I took her computer class in '76,
Wow.
and I went into that as my career. Because of her.
People say she was very influential, got them through school, they understood math, it steered them toward certain careers. That's so awesome. Yeah.
Did she have a house built?
That house was older. I believe David Fulton had built the home before the Hughes family moved in. Yeah. And then I think I'll just pass everything over here to the two ladies in the front row who are actually related to the Jacobs sisters. The first one here is Mabel Jacobs, and she was considered one of the best vocal teachers, coaches in the Midwest. Very, very well known. In 1913, she graduated from St. Olaf College. She traveled with the college to Europe, and they had a series of concerts. And at the conclusion of the tour, she decided to stay in Europe and pursue vocal studies. She won a scholarship to the Royal Conservatory. Is it pronounced Leipzig? Leipzig? When World War I started, she found herself kind of trapped in Germany. She remained there until the war ended. And there's a really good article I think you had shared with me earlier about her time there and her experiences. If anyone wants to know more, let me know. I will direct you to that. In 1919, she returned to the United States and lived in New York. She had auditioned for the Metropolitan Opera. A second time, unfortunately, she was sick and was unable to go through the audition. But she didn't let that deter her from music. She became a professor of voice at Emporia State College in Kansas. And then in 1942, she came back to Hudson. And she wanted to care for her parents, and they had a farm. Mabel gave private lessons and joined the faculty of McPhail School of Music in Minneapolis. And she was presented with the Distinguished Alumni Award by St. Olaf College. She continued with her music for the rest of her life, and she never married. She died at the age of 86 in 1977, teaching until the last. When she was asked about retiring in 1976, she responded, "I can't quit, I'm still learning." And so she and then her sister, Judith, they lived together. Judith also had an extensive education, graduate of the University of Minnesota, took classes at other universities. She was a professor of education in Kansas, and upon retirement, she moved with her sister back to Hudson. She was a talented violinist and cellist, as well as a wonderful painter. She was also known for her creative writing, especially her 11 volumes of prose and poetry, and we have those in the history room. She taught creative writing for Advotech in Hudson and the St. Croix Valley Arts Guild for many years. The Jacob sisters were remembered when a short piece of road in the town of Hudson was named Jacob's Lane. Okay, ladies, anything else to add? They were both really, again, a lot of these people are kind of ahead of their time in a lot of respects, aren't they?
Well, Aunt Mabel was very proud when she was going to school at Miss Davis at Northfield. And the St. Olaf, and the chorus traveled the world. And she was so proud because she was Norwegian and she sang a solo for the king.
Oh, that is.
She was exceptional, her voice range. And she said after she had been trapped in Germany through the war, she said, "I can't say anything bad about the German people. They were wonderful to me. They shared their meager food with her, and they were wonderful." She always praised them. And an interesting thing, the family would send money and letters to her all the time. She never received a one.
Oh.
So the Germans got the money that they were sending to her, but her morale stayed high. It was difficult, but it's interesting to hear her talk about it.
Yes.
And she was very tall. She was 6'1" or 6'2". So Mabel was very tall. And Judith was tall too. Yeah, they were interesting couple.
Yes.
Aunts.
I bet. That's neat though.
And Mabel, it was interesting, they were sisters. But Mabel always praised what a wonderful teacher Judith was.
Well, it's nice.
So that was nice.
It was.
And Judith as well praised Mabel. They were outstanding. They were the old-time genteel ladies.
And neither one married, so that's why moved back here and lived together.
As circumstances went, they took good care of their parents.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to see this, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll continue on in kind of the education kind of realm and teachers and that. Everybody should know E.P. Rock School, named for Edward P. Rock. Rock was born in Ellsworth, Wisconsin. His parents were Nicholas and Barbara Rock, and they lived in River Falls for some time, where he received his education. This is a picture of his football picture when he played for River Falls High School in 1912. In 1919, he began his career as an educator in Hudson. That year, he also married Margaret Williams. You can see him in this picture listed as a science teacher in Hudson in 1920. And note his signature high hair in almost every picture until you got older. His hair was really kind of timely now. In 1923, at the age of 25, E.P. Rock became the youngest superintendent in Wisconsin. He continued as superintendent until his retirement in 1964. He served 45 years in Hudson, 41 as superintendent. After his retirement, he served on the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors for several years, and he passed away in Madison in 1987. And he and his wife are buried in Willow River Cemetery. Anybody remember E.P. Rock? Good. Good. You had a grin on your face. Good.
Well, he was, principal and superintendent of schools, so I was a kid, so he was a big man, but he was always kind and, all that good stuff.
And you were saying Willis always referred to him as Mr. Rock, never as E.P. Yeah, he was Mr.
You
Rock.
could tell he had a lot of respect for Mr. Rock, and he admired him too.
And then a couple other people you might recognize are Marie and Harry Blakeman. Many of you are familiar with Norlake, which began as a small refrigeration company created by Harry and Carl Norelius. Harry and Carl had worked for United Refrigeration Company in Pennsylvania and helped open the new plant here in Hudson that was down on First Street. But in 1947, the plant was bought out and they decided to pool their money and started their own refrigeration company in a small creamery building on 2nd and Elm Street. And so their business started small, some of their first items being a milk cooler, an ice cube maker, and a hood ventilation system for Lurk's Bar in Afton, Minnesota. That was one of their first products they made. Okay. In 1949, the company started building a new addition that would more than double their current space. So this picture of the upper left, that's where they started the old creamery building, kind of like a garage. Then they built the building in the upper right. And if you know where Norlake, the office building is today, when it first started, you couldn't even see the top of it. That land really slopes more than you think it does. All you could see was the roof of the building. So they stuck their sign on the top of the roof so people would know they're there. And then it was in 1953 that they added a 6,700 square foot addition, which really raised the roof, as they said. So it became visible on 2nd Street. Harry Blakeman left a lasting mark on Hudson, not only for his business, which led in design and manufacturing, but for his leadership and philanthropy. He was active in Rotary, the Phipps Foundation, Trinity Lutheran Church, Bank Board, Hudson Memorial Hospital, Boy Scouts of America, St. Croix Y Camp, and the Willow River Cemetery, and Valley Arts Guild. And he was leader in the St. Croix Historical Society and in most of those other organizations. And Harry died in 1976, but Marie carried on the company. She went on to run Norlake herself after her husband died. She was chairman of the board and treasurer of the business. She was known for her own philanthropy, giving to projects such as the Hudson Medical Center, the Phipps Center for the Arts, the Marie Blakeman Senior Center at CCH, and was the director of the Hudson Chamber of Commerce for 4 years. Under her direction, Norlake was named one of Wisconsin's 50 largest woman-owned firms with outstanding sales performance in 1999. She died in 1999, and the company continued until 2021 under the leadership of her daughter, Barbara Blakeman Richardson, and her husband, James Neeland Richardson. And since January of 2000, the Marie Blakeman Award has been presented to someone in the Hudson area with a life well lived in service to one's community. Hey, have any stories about the Blakemans?
When we first moved here, I didn't have an educational job, and I went to work for Norlake in their office, and she was a very prestigious lady, but she'd always go on vacation, and when she'd come back, she would hand out little trinkets to the people in the office to say, we appreciate you. They'd also lay out season tickets for the twins and for the basketball and football teams and first come, first serve. She was always taking care of other people's needs and a very pleasant woman to talk with.
And they always had company picnics. I remember taking our kids to the company picnics that they bring the riding horses in. And it was really
Nice.
fun.
Gunny sack races,
Oh.
very traditional picnics events for the employees.
What was the fine line, Nancy?
The Fine Line is their monthly magazine. And so we have the collection. Barbara just donated most of those to the history room over there. So we have those over in the history room.
Well, this is someone you wouldn't have met, but I always think Anita North is kind of cool 'cause she was Hudson's first millionaire. And she spent her entire life in Hudson. Her parents were Lemuel, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Lemuel, and Sarah. And he had a store, pretty successful mercantile and grain business on the 500 block of 2nd Street. And then we have a picture next here of her home at 502 3rd Street. Beautiful home. The family moved there in They moved there at some point. I'm not sure if they built it or not, but it was built in 1884. And then in 1912, she purchased a 10-acre strip of land in Buckeye Coulee for $1,700. She then built a summer home there in 1917. The house is still there, apparently, although only the middle section is original. That's what I read. It is located at 5 Berkmos Park. She only had one sibling, Harry, who was the president of the National Bank of Hudson. He was one of the first people in Hudson to own a car, and he died after a short illness. When Anita died in 1921, her wealth was valued in excess of $800,000. By today's standards, her estate would have been worth $8.9 to $9.9 million. And they are all buried at Willow River Cemetery. Yeah.
And we're going to continue on with a whole string of in the medical field, switch over from the teaching to medicine here. This is a very short story on Andrea Brody. Andrea Brody was a physician, had her practice here at 601 2nd Street in 1898 and 99, where Smilin' Moose is today. So the building over there is where Smilin' Moose is, but the 3rd floor since then has burned down. So it's only 2 stories today, the building. She came to America from Norway and at just 15 and married John Browdy in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. But she wanted to become a doctor and he didn't approve of that. And so she, at that time, which was very unusual, divorced him, went on to the University of Minnesota to get her medical degree, practiced a short while in Chicago, and then moved to Hudson. And it was in Hudson that she met A.W. Hall and married, then they moved soon to Virginia, Minnesota. And she was the first woman doctor and only woman doctor in the mines in Virginia. Minnesota was real tough, lumber and mining area. And so she has a very long and colorful obituary there that can be found at the Iron Range Research Center in Chisholm, and we have a copy of it over here in the history room. But only here a short time, but we believe it's probably Hudson's first female doctor that we had. And Ernest Gatchell, or known as Gatch, was born in Ravenna, Ohio in 1860. He moved with his family to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and lived in the state for 70 years. He attended the University of Michigan and graduated as a pharmaceutical chemist. And he found himself in Hudson in 1883, where he was an assistant to John Sleeper Johnson at his drugstore, where Gatch slept in the back room. And you can probably recognize the building, Mickelson's on the side there. It seems there's always been a pharmacy at the corner of 2nd and Locust Streets. The first drugstore on the site was destroyed in the Great Fire of 1866. It was rebuilt and owned by Dr. Cabin in the late 1870s. Carl Peterson came next and enlarged the building. Then J.R. Hathaway took it over in 1883. And then finally it turned to the hands of John Sleeper Johnson. He sold the business to E.E. Gatchell, and it was Gatchell then that built the brick building that still remains today. And in 1906, Gatchell took in Harry Mickelson into partnership. And since then, Henry became the sole proprietor after Gatchell died. Gatchell, here he is standing alongside Frank Crean, one of his right-hand men in the pharmacy. He was also responsible for other buildings in town. This is the one on 212 Locust Street where Beloved Makers is today. And we can actually find Gatchell and Dr. Browdy working together after the 1899 tornado that hit near Richmond as part of the Star and Times article. They had gone up to help. And Gatchell actually, one of his favorite hobbies was he called to live on the farm, which was on Lake Malibu at that time. This cabin still remains today on private property. He loved photography, nature, and his kindness to children. He also was a great contributor to area needs and could often be seen riding his bicycle down the road, his bald head sticking out from a scarf around his neck. And Willis Miller wrote the following about his cabin. It was plain, Spartan, and suited his bachelor lifestyle. He lined the walls with photographs of family, friends, and children and visitors. Besides the covers of Saturday Evening Post and Harper's, there were squares of curios sent by friends from many foreign countries, birds, an assortment of plants, a piano, and even a foot-pumped reed organ that Gatch played at on occasion. The St. Croix County Historical Society planned to purchase the cabin and move it to Willow River State Park in 1992. However, they figured out how much it was going to cost, and they just didn't have the money to be able to move it, so the cabin still remains on private property today.
So that was his home?
That was his home, yeah. Right. And some of you might remember Dr. Newton. He was another medical professional in Hudson, highly regarded doctor for over 40 years. He arrived in Hudson in 1917, joined the practice of Dr. McCormick, and in later years had an office at 605 2nd Street, where Spectrum Insurance is today. And from 1934 to 1953, Hudson had no hospital. We'd had the sanatorium before and the cancer center, but there wasn't a hospital for people to go to for regular ills. So he would make house visits, home visits. He would have to go around and post quarantine signs on houses where people had typhoid or mumps, chickenpox, or measles. He was a very compassionate man. He often forgave debts to those who couldn't pay. And in 1958, Newton received the first Outstanding Citizen Award from the Rotary Club at the Hotel Hudson.
Oh, yeah, Lorraine.
He was one of the doctors that made house calls.
Yeah.
In those days, you called, the doctor came to your house.
Wow.
It was unusual if you went to the office in the beginning.
That's something. Wow.
Most people born either at home or they would go to River Falls to be born or over into the cities to be born. He loved to travel, enjoyed various sports. He and his wife Lottie had 2 children, George and Charlotte, and they lived at 919 4th Street for several years. And later they lived at 1215 2nd Street. And so here he is with a group of doctors listed above. And then he did serve as Hudson's mayor from also being a doctor. He was the mayor of the town from 1934 to 1950. And it was common to see him at Dibbo's with Mr. Rock. E.P. Rock is there. You can notice him with his hair, and Clarence Armstrong, who was owner of the Red Owl, and William Hagan. There's, yeah. Did you? Oh, I thought. Something else. Okay. Yes.
I thought of something when you meant, I was born in River Falls Hospital, and my brother was born in River Falls Hospital because there was not a Hudson Hospital back in the 40s.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Lonnie was born there also.
I was there too.
In 58.
Jeez.
We didn't have a laying-in hospital in Hudson anymore. We had dailies for a while, and then we had Quinlan's for a while. Well, when they stopped doing it, and we didn't have a hospital, we had to go someplace else. So 1958.
Was Quinlan's the old school? Was the on Second? Was Quinlan's? Where was that?
It was on the end of Locust. If you
Okay.
drive at the 7th Street Hill, the bottom, if you
Okay.
drive straight up Locust and keep going into the hill, you'd go into their house.
Oh,
That was a
okay.
Quinlan. I had a son born there, and I had a son born in Davis.
And most of you have noticed that the football field here named for Dr. Newton Field in April of 1963, the School Board of Education voted to name the football field at E.P. Rock School Property Newton Field in recognition of the long and faithful service to the Hudson community by Dr. James E. Newton, who died in 1961. So, and one more quick doctor. Well, not really a doctor. John Till, the plaster doctor. So he was actually a blacksmith by trade. He had no medical degree. But he came to Wisconsin, Turtle Lake first, and he brought a plaster with him, which was a mixture of kerosene and croton oil that he would put on your back and supposedly be able to cure anything that you had. And so why on earth did people go to him? Because the people lined up. So when he lived in Somerset, Octave and Melanie Cloutier actually took them into his house and let him sell out of their house because apparently he had treated a man, took a man from Somerset, had taken his wife to see Till, and through his treatments had cured her. And so news just spread rapidly around Somerset. There was even a story where he reattached a dog's severed tail, and that 10 days later the dog was wagging it. And so there were many, many tales found. The plaster, when put on somebody's back, would actually eat away. The croton oil is very toxic substance, would eat away at their back, and it said it would look like raw beef. Your back would look like raw beef after having applied the plaster. So
They were mental. They had mental problems, and they would go there and get the plaster, and they were healed.
This is terrible. Oh.
He did never charge for his thing, but people would leave gratuities, and according to the banker, he regularly made $3,000 deposits each week from people buying his cure, supposedly. The state medical board tried to take away his license many times, but a jury in the county of his peers wouldn't convict him. They wanted him to stay on. Well, he ended up in Hudson. He was tied to Hudson. The Cloutiers got tired of him. Eventually, he moved to New Richmond shortly and then moved to Hudson in about 1918 to 1919. He bought the Galahad School for Boys that had closed down in 1919 in North Hudson and lived there with his wife Helwig and son John. And he owned the property until 1932 and other property along the St. Croix River, which he eventually sold in 1939. The state medical board finally did convict Till in 1920. He had to agree not to practice medicine again in Wisconsin. And that's when he started he lost pretty much all his property because he didn't have a way of making money anymore. He ended up dying in Wisconsin, in Kiel, Wisconsin. But so famous, they actually wrote songs. This was a song written about Dr. John Till of the area. So that's kind of our brief look at medical things. We are.
He had a son, Johnny,
Yeah.
and he was very good looking. And I had interviewed a lady for other things, and she just happened to say, well, you know, that Dr. Till had a son, Johnny. And she said the girls were just wacky over him.
Oh. No accounting for taste, yeah. Well, I kind of think that we've, it's going on a little over an hour, so maybe we've gotten through. We had a few other people that we could have mentioned, most of which you wouldn't have known personally, but I don't want to belabor. We're already here for over an hour, so. I guess I'm curious, are there any topics or anything that you would be interested in the future?
The fire you
Yeah.
referred to several times.
The fire of 1866? Okay. One of the people we were going to cover was Carrie Goss. Carrie Goss lived, you know where the dental office is at the bottom of Vine and 2nd? There's a dental office there. The home that's now some business, some office, was her home, and her husband was a banker. And she wrote her memories of the day of the fire. And we have that in the history room. And it's very, very interesting firsthand account, because that was in May, I think, wasn't it? The Great Fire of 1866. It was May, and it was very, very windy. And the fire started, we think, by Dick's Bar.
Yeah, we were going to cover Horace Taylor too.
Yeah.
And supposedly started in one of his shops in the back.
And it just all the way down to where, almost to Buckeye, that whole 2nd Street area. The only building that really survived was where the newspaper was, which is Ultimissimo today on Locust. It just, all the damage and people running around with like the bank box trying to find a place to secure it, and then later they couldn't find where it was, and it was in somebody's home eventually, and it must have been incredible. Usually on the Historic Hudson page I will post that every year on the day that happened, because it's such an inspiration, I think, that they rebuilt. You know.
The buildings mostly wood.
Pardon me?
Were the buildings mostly
They were, and after this happened, they actually passed something that the buildings could no longer be made of wood because of the fire. And then the fire department formed in the 1870s, I believe, 1872. I can't remember the exact date, but that came out of the great need for something.
And it was pretty common in that time all across the country of the fires, and that's where we get the great Sanborn maps that we use a lot for history, because the insurance companies had to create maps to show where the wooden structures were, where the brick structures were, concrete, that type of thing. So it gives us a lot of information from the times there.
Yeah.
So did they just have to let it burn down?
It really, yeah, I mean, it just wiped out. I have a picture of it somewhere. There are pictures in the history book of where it just leveled. Do you have that in the Taylor?
That's what I was going to see.
For some reason, I think, or Carrie Goss. Carrie Goss, maybe. Yep, forward
Yes.
it. Carrie Goss, like,
Oh my
Okay.
God.
yeah. And that would be, can you see where 2nd Street would be? That's kind of like over in the area of Vine Street, looking north.
But the other side survived.
A lot of those were not businesses. Some of them were, some remained, but most of all the major businesses burnt down. They had some barns. There were some residences in there as well. I'm not sure.
It was like 66 businesses and 25 dwellings or something like that.
And one of the books lists, Willis wrote a whole story about it. That's in one of his books, but he also covered the damage and the loss. Like that Lemuel North, I mean, in those days, like $6,000 would have been an incredible amount of money in 1866. So it's a really interesting
I read a story
history.
about that. There was a lot of looting that went on at the time too. And later they were looking for some certain thing. And in their searching, they would go into their hen house and go under the hens and find stuff.
Oh,
Isn't that interesting? They even had it in the chicken coops.
wow.
But that's where they found stuff. A lot of things.
Why is it that on the other side of the street?
I know it doesn't look like that much. Those I think are closer to First. Do you think those were the mills, the big things along First Street?
Is that looking at the river?
This is kind of like,
Distance?
yes,
It's
yes.
hard to tell, yeah.
It looks like it's maybe more like, but that's the only photo that we know of this. Yes. I've never seen it. Maybe there is another one, but I've not seen one. Yeah. But just think of the devastation and the homes, and some of the churches were open and people were taking their belongings there. People were actually, the merchants were throwing their goods out onto the street, but unfortunately they all, perished. So, yeah. Are there any other topics?
We do have somebody coming in that wrote the book on the Ellsworth line, the railroad that went from Hudson to Ellsworth.
Yeah.
Colby we have his book that's really good. He's going to be coming in June to speak.
Like June 4th or something. We'll make sure we post that. But yeah, he has like 6 books on the railroad. The Ellsworth line is the book that's more local, but he would be very, very good to see. And then we have Ben Wopat and some other individual, I don't know, are speaking on POW camps. Is that World War II per the area? That'll be coming up sometime in May. Watch the library calendar. They will eventually be putting these things on. There's some interesting history ones coming up.
I want Amy she has a tour of North Hudson that she did a while back too. It'd be fun to.
Well, just for my neighbors, I did this. I thought, no, Lorraine is the one you want to ask. But I had, it wouldn't be like a walk around the block like we've done, but it would be certain places like before whatever the 501 was there. It was a series of restaurants that were owned, the DeBruzzi's, Sam's Bowling Alley. Way back it was, I think, where there were cars for sale there. We have photos of that, but Lorraine is the North Hudson expert. But it might be fun to do something on North Hudson if anybody would be interested in that. We'd use.
That would be fun too.
Yeah.
The railroad yards and.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an idea then. We can see, we could expand what I wrote for my neighbors.
I think the splitting off of the governments is interesting too, between Hudson and North Hudson, when North Hudson decided to become a separate
Oh, yeah.
entity.
Lorraine,
And I
didn't
actually
Lorraine
found
speak
there
about
was a
that?
study done more recently to put them back together. And the recommendation was to do that in the study that we have. We have a copy of the study in there, but it didn't have it. So
Apparently a lot of fights between the teenagers and
They're talking about how Hudson and North Hudson were split up and why there was rivalries. Oh, there were rivalries. She knows all that story. She knows all
Oh, yeah.
stories.
They wouldn't let couples get married if one was from North Hudson and one was from the city. Seriously, it was that bad, yeah.
Dorothy mentioned to us that the Italians didn't want you marrying outside the Italians.
That was a big part.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, those are great ideas. Anything else?
How about the railroads were huge?
And I think this author will be really good. This author coming in June 4th, I think it was, in the morning, Arlen Colby. And we have at least the Ellsworth line in the history room that you could kind of see, but really detailed, good photos of the railroad.
In wasn't at one time a logging? There was logging in, or the river was used for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at one time there was a time you could walk across the river on the logs, yeah.
And Stillwater area, huge with logs, yeah.
Is that what one of your recent speakers was talking about,
Yeah.
was the logging? And there was another one on the riverboats, which was really interesting.
Right, we did one on the history of Hudson that include some of the logging, and then Dallas, talked about the riverboats.
So there were mills down by the river? Like where the park is now?
Yeah.
A bunch of.
Yeah, warehouses, a lot of mills. Lumber, yeah, very big.
There was a boxing ring here, wasn't there?
Yeah, up above, let's see, right where this is, right?
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
I
the
thought
old
that was
boxing
an interesting
arena.
story too, yeah. Because they would the trains would come in from the Twin Cities and bring people here for the boxing events, yeah. That was interesting.
Maybe something with places.
First Street.
What's that?
There was that hotel down on First Street.
Are you thinking of
The Coit or the?
down farther? Are you thinking of it was the man lived there? What was his name? Harris, the Harris Hotel. Maybe we should just do some with places, like the boxing, some different places that are no longer there. That might be taken from our walks
Walks around the
even.
block, yeah.
Just take them out. And
The Armory too, I think is in.
the Armory, yes.
We've done, if you haven't seen, we've taken one square block. Russell Nicollet asked for more history on the downtown area through the Historic Hudson Facebook site. So we decided to just take a block at a time. And so we've tried to work back into the history of each block. So.
Now we're coming back up the street. So we went all the way down to Buckeye. We did a walk along the park, and then now we did the 1 to 300 block, and then we're doing the 400 now.
Coming
It's-
up Second Street on the east
On the
side.
east side. And it's hard to do because you take each building or site and you try to go back as far as you can. But when you're reading old accounts, and there are several, 3 or 4, but they'll say, well, this was north of this. There are no addresses. This was, yeah.
Oh, and how many times did those properties turn over owners over them?
Well, even the buildings, was it the 500 block about drove us loopy? That one building, it had so many.
Yeah, well, and a lot
Or
of the buildings
agavias.
downtown are block buildings that had multiple businesses in each building, and then people were going in and out and moving around a lot.
But you can access those if you get on the library page, the website for the library, and then get to the history room. I think it's Explore History Room, and then we have all the links to the walks around the block. I think we have a link from Nate with Dallas's presentation and the other things we've done, and Lorraine has given talks, and I think at least one of those is on our page. So just History Room, just scroll down, and you'll see all these links you can click on.
When you say Lorraine McGrew?
Lorraine Jacobs. Yeah, Lorraine McGrew is wonderful. We saw her where we were. She's just a wonderful lady. Well, we thank you so much for coming today, and please load up the. Thank you. The library provided fruit and goodies, and if you already had some, have some more. Thanks for coming.